I want to offer probably a useful way of looking at what's going on here, right? Because we're kind of burdened or bound to the sole perspective that we truly know we have, right? Which is our own, right? And that tends to be couched between our birth, life, and then when we die, right? And it's very rare, or it can take something special, right, in order, or just an interest, a keen interest, for us to look back on history and to imagine even into the future, right? We tend kind of not to do that. We stay in our own box, right? But if we look at our place in history at the moment, right, and allow for the fact that those that have come before us and those that will come after us kind of melt into one, right? And there's a movement, or there's a growth spurt, or a developmental arc, right? That is, it goes beyond us, but it includes us, right? And we add to it as we go. So if you look at the last 20 years, but the 20th century just gone, and before that, right, we've always had societal scaffolds there for people to just adhere to, right, and accept as this is the way we do things. But over the last couple of decades, right, you're seeing a continuous, nearly natural flow towards self-responsibility, where these scaffolds are, and here's where like the postmodern stuff comes into play, right, because there's a use to it. It just has to be balanced, right, where you look at these social scaffolds and you question the legitimacy of them, and you question the usefulness of them, and you question the limitations in them, right? And I think what we're seeing now is the overall maturation of people, right? Of a people. And there's a demand being put on us to grow up, essentially, to shed our need and our desire for these social scaffolds, right? Because the church was a major one for Irish people, warts and all, right, and benefits and all. But it was a social scaffold. There was a worldview that you're born into. You partake in that worldview, you internalize that worldview, and you hand that worldview over. But all ideas come and go, right? And worldviews, they rise and they fall, as do civilizations, as do ages and people, right? And so what followed from that then is a somewhat knee-jerk response to individualism, where it went from, here's the worldview that's applicable to everybody, this is what we do, to the total opposite of that, where there is no such thing as this is what we do. Each individual can do whatever they want, right? It's a real adolescent sort of perspective on things, the rebelliousness of youth, right? And the struggle toward maturity. And I think that's what we're all engaged in here. And when we're left to fall back on ourselves, the question is, what is there? When there is no socially approved scaffolding for us to make our way with, right? Clinging to the rails, the handrails, when that's all been taken away, what is left in the person? What sort of morality do you come up with yourself when there's not one that's been given to you? And I think that's the struggle of our time, is growing out of the need to have all of our morality and our worldview decided for us, addressing the rebelliousness the antithesis that's going to come from that, against the establishment of what was and what was held to be true, and sacrosanct even. And working our way through that, right? So we've dealt with the total extreme of subjectivity, which is whatever I feel about the world is what the world is. And the most important thing in the world and for the world is how I feel about my own experience. And the world needs to morph and change depending on how I feel about it, right? And we're kind of grown out of that now. We've went a little bit down the road with that, and we've kind of seen how detrimental that can be to any semblance of societal stability, right? So we're kind of guessing now that maybe we can retreat a little back the way, take some lessons too, okay? Always learning, and take a different path, which is, yes, there is an intrinsic value to the subjective element of life, because I am my own center of my universe, right? Of course I am, as are you. But that does not mean, or that does not entitle me to be able to claim that the world should tailor itself and morph and change depending on how I want it to be, right? So that's the lesson we've learned from that. We've had a monolithic worldview. We've had the destabilization of no worldview. And now we need to find something that is balanced and something that works in the middle. And that is going to be a society, ultimately, that appreciates individuality and doesn't champion conformity for the sake of conformity. It will adopt a perspective, or it should adopt a perspective, that each individual's experience absolutely is important and should be listened to, providing it's reasonable, right? And even if it's not, we can learn from that as well. But we'll have to deal with that, right? And foundationally then, it is, we want to live in a world where we're okay. Not guaranteed bliss, but we're okay to walk the streets and not be in fear every day, because that's no way of living. But that is the way that is led, or that is the result of what has come from the counter to the handrails that were there for us in the 20th century and before that, right? So the burden is on each of us as individuals to come up with a morality and a moral code that is our own, but is also deeply respective of the fact that as much as I value the importance of how I want to conduct myself and according to what virtues I strive towards, I also respect that in other people too. So the value of my individuality and the importance of it is stops at the point where it infringes on somebody else's free expression of themselves. And we can absolutely get to a place where that's workable. There's going to be mad extremes along the way, as we've seen, right? And those will need to be dealt with in a human way, right? In a reasonable way, instead of just total chaos and kick the apple cart over, right? So that is the burden that is on each of us. And so long as each individual is winning their own battle with themselves, between self-expression that's organic, authentic, and natural, right, against the desire to conform and the desire to recognize that there's certain things that will have to be limited because they are corrosive to a society, right? And that's maybe a step along the way. And ultimately, I think if we're being fully ourselves, then we automatically respect the fact and we allow for the freedom of other people to do the same thing, right? I think that is the most humane point to reach. And it might sound slightly idealistic, but what about it, right? So each of these battles, the overall battle for Western civilization is to be won in the hearts and minds of each individual, right? And I think that's where we are. We're in a state, or an age, if you want, where we have to grow up. If you view ourselves as like an adolescent, we're maturing and the demand is put on us to grow up, learn lessons, become more self-sufficient, become more responsible for yourself and for the world around you. But yourself first and primarily.